I want to welcome all of you to this afternoon's program, Discover Nature with Runge Nature Center. My name is Matt Swearingen. I'm a library associate with the Columbia Public Library, part of the Dana Boone Regional Library System. This afternoon's presentation is a part of our summer reading program. This year's summer reading theme is Tales and Tales. So we have a lot of programs, book recommendations, and events focused on animals, the outdoors, and storytelling. If you haven't already done so, you can sign up for summer reading at any of our branches or on the bookmobile, or you can sign up online and print out a reading tracker from home. The website you can visit is www.dbrl.org/summer reading. If you do sign up online, you're always welcome to come into one of our branches and pick up a reading tracker if you don't want to print one from home. For the adult program, you will read 3 books, write 3 brief book reviews, and complete 7 activities. When you have finished, you can come into the library to pick up a free mug as a finishing prize and be entered into drawings to win a Kindle Fire and bookstore gift cards. I want to highlight a couple of upcoming summer reading programs that we have that you might be interested in. The first is How to Find an Owl in Your Backyard. That's coming up on Tuesday, July 6th from 7 to 8:30 p.m. That'll be via Zoom. That program features naturalist Mark Glenshaw, aka the Owl Man, who will show you which owls you may see and hear around your home. He has been studying great horned owls in Forest Park in St. Louis since 2005 and has led numerous owl prowls in the park. We also have later that week, Monsters of the Ozarks. That is Thursday, July 8th from 7 to 8 p.m., also via Zoom. Caitlin McConnell, founder of Ozarks Alive, will talk about the beings, some may call them monsters, that have populated lore and legend of the Ozarks in stories that have been passed down through generations. And a couple of quick Zoom housekeeping notes before we get started. There will be time for questions at the end of the presentation. So if you have a question, feel free to enter it into the chat. There's a little chat bubble at the bottom. If you hover over the bottom of your Zoom screen, I'll be monitoring the chat and can ask Austin to address those questions at the end. If you would rather ask a question on camera, you can use the raise hand tool, and that will let me know that you have a question, and I'll allow you to unmute your microphone and ask that question directly. So now I want to introduce our presenter. We are pleased to be joined today by Austin Lambert. Austin is a naturalist at Runge Nature Center in Jefferson City, and I'm going to just throw it over to him. So welcome, Austin. Thank you for being here.
All right. Thank you so much, Matt. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Austin, and I'm a naturalist with the Missouri Department of Conservation. And I am here at the Runge Nature Center currently. So we're actually in one of the classrooms at the Nature Center, which is where we might ordinarily hold programs when people come out to us, especially on days kind of like today where the weather's there's a little more uncertainty to it. But I'm very happy to be here and be talking with all of you today. And so Runge, if folks haven't been there before, is a great place to come and learn all about nature. And so I'm sure a lot of us have been here, especially being folks from central Missouri, at least. And so you come down to Runge, we have a big box turtle statue that's off to your left, right before you come in the main entrance of the building. Once you come into the Nature Center, we have all sorts of exhibits. We have a treehouse that you can climb up inside of. We have some different animals. We have some fish and some snakes and some salamanders, different things on display. We have this fantastic wildlife viewing area. We can look out, you can see turkeys and deer and all sorts of songbirds, different animals out feeding at some feeders. And so you can come to Runge and certainly learn all about nature. But of course, it's not the very best place to learn about nature. And today, after we're all finished with this program, I'm going to challenge you to actually get outside, which is the very best place to learn about nature. Even if it is raining, nature is still out there. So when we say outside, we don't just mean places like going to a prairie or the savannah or a jungle or those types of things. You can even discover nature in your very own backyard. So get out there, especially after it stops raining, even during the rain if you're feeling brave, because you can learn all sorts of things by getting out there and just experiencing nature anywhere outdoors. So here at Runge, we are a part of the Missouri Department of Conservation. So some of you might recognize this little triangle that we have here. So this is the symbol for the Department of Conservation, and it kind of tells you what the department does. On this triangle, we see several different images. We see the top image, which is a leaf, an oak leaf. We see the middle image, which is a fish, and the very bottom image, which is a raccoon. And that stands for the Forest, Fish, and Wildlife Resources of Missouri. At the Department of Conservation, we help conserve and manage and protect these different resources, and we like to teach people about them. So hopefully you care just a little bit more, and then decide that someday you would also like to take care of them. So that's what my job comes in as a naturalist, trying to get people to learn a little bit more about these things, so you start caring about them, and then decide to do something about helping them into the future. So that's kind of what the department does. And so we're very lucky to be living in Missouri with this fantastic Department of Conservation and all the other very great things that we have out there in Missouri, all the different plants and animals and wildlife that we have throughout the entire state, because there's all sorts of different types of wildlife. We have some wildlife like the animals behind me, all the different fish that we might find in our different river systems and our ponds. We have a great many amphibians, so things like frogs and salamanders. We have a lot of mammals, so any animal that has hair. Then we have our feathered friends, of course, all the different birds that we have in the state. And then we have one of my very favorite groups, which is a group that we're actually spending a lot of time talking about today, and that is reptiles. And so I think reptiles are absolutely amazing critters, and we don't realize how lucky we are to be living in a state with such fantastic reptile diversity. Because Missouri is a fairly large state, and we cover quite an area going from northern Missouri down to southern Missouri and east to west, we have all sorts of different types of reptiles that occur here within our borders. And we're not going to go through and talk about every single species, but instead we'll be kind of talking about some things that those reptiles have in common and some things that kind of make them different from other types of reptiles. So I'm sure lots of you have heard of reptiles before. Let's just take a minute, and I want you to think. Think of any animal that you can think of in Missouri that is a reptile. A few things might be coming to mind. Some of us might be thinking about animals like turtles, which certainly are reptiles, absolutely. We also might be thinking about things like lizards, which are one of my very favorite type of Missouri reptile. And then we have snakes as well. So another type of reptile that have Missouri. Now, there are more reptiles out there in the world. There are things like crocodiles and alligators, but those don't occur in Missouri. Those are further down in the southeastern United States and other portions of the world. But we do have these three types in Missouri. We have the turtle, the snake, and the lizard. Now, what I think is really fascinating about these reptiles is that they are very different from each other, but there are things that they have in common. That's what makes them reptiles. Just like I am not a reptile, I am a mammal, which are any animal that has hair. And I have hair, at least for the moment. Someday I might not, but right now I do, so I'm still a mammal. When we think about birds, birds have one feature in common. One very kind of obvious feature is their feathers all over their body. Only birds have feathers. But what features do reptiles have in common? When we look at something like a turtle, which is a reptile, and a snake, which is a reptile, we never confuse the two because they are so different. So what features do they have in common that make them both reptiles? Anything that you can think of? Well, usually when we're looking at animals, we start with the outside of the body first. So if we look at the outside of these animals, we might notice a very special feature about them. So if we've seen frogs and salamanders and some of those amphibian creatures, we know that those animals have a slimy skin. Reptiles do not have a slimy skin, but instead have a dry, scaly skin. And that dry, scaly skin covers their entire body. And it does something very, very important for them. It helps protect them because these scales are fairly rigid and are very good for protecting them. Not even necessarily things like predators, but even things like from the heat and the different elements that there might be outside. And they also give them their color. Now, some reptiles are really well camouflaged, like the little skin that I have right here, which is actually just a tablecloth. And other reptiles might be a little bit more brightly colored. So regardless of whether they're brightly colored or camouflaged, those scales do help to give them the color that they do have. So scales are one thing that reptiles have in common. All reptiles have scales, or they descended from creatures that do have scales. So there are a couple of exceptions. We'll talk about some of those here in a second. But dry, scaly skin is one feature they have in common. But there's more than just that. But for those other features, we kind of had to look internally instead. So some of us might have heard of the term cold-blooded versus warm-blooded. Which one are reptiles? Well, reptiles are cold-blooded animals. And that doesn't mean that they're cold all the time. Instead, that means that their body temperature is the same temperature as their environment. So if they're over here in the sun and they start getting too warm, they might go find a shadier spot to try and cool off. So if it's a really hot day out, their body temperature will be much warmer. If it's a very cold day out, their body temperature is going to drop pretty drastically. We, on the other hand, are warm-blooded, which doesn't mean that we're hot all the time, or most of us aren't hot all the time. But instead, it means that our body temperature is nearly constant at all times, at least when we're feeling healthy. So if I get too hot, my body does something special to help cool me down. I start to get really sweaty, and that drops my body temperature down to about 98 degrees. If I start to get too cold, well, then my body might start to shiver and start to shake, and that warms my body temperature up to 98 degrees. So I always stay about 98 degrees, which is where kind of the average typical healthy human body temperature lies. So always constant versus the up and down, and having to move around to find the right temperature in your environment. So reptiles have dry, scaly skin, and they are cold-blooded. But there's one more feature that reptiles have in common, and this is another one that we don't see quite as often. But think about ways that reptiles have the next generation of reptiles. How do they have babies? Well, they don't really give live birth the same way that mammals do. They don't lay their eggs in the water like an amphibian or a fish. Instead, they have a very specialized egg that's very different from all of the eggs out there. And so the eggs that we're mostly familiar with are probably things like chicken eggs. If I had a chicken egg in front of me, and if I were to take it and I were to tap it really hard, that egg might do a couple different things. Like if it was on a table, it might roll or it might crack because those eggshells are very hard, but they're also very brittle. So they have a very stiff shell that can very easily crack if you hit it just hard enough. A reptile egg is just a little bit different. Their eggs, rather than being brittle, kind of have this rubbery or leathery shell. So if I were to poke a reptile egg, it might flex in just a little bit and flex right back. Why do you think a reptile egg would want to have that ability versus having the very hard shell like a bird egg has? Well, there might be a variety of different reasons, but one that I can think of off the top of my head are when we look at animals like turtles. When turtles lay their eggs, they usually dig a hole in some sandy soil, and then they drop their eggs into that hole. If their eggs were like bird eggs and they dropped, they would probably end up cracking. Because they have that kind of leathery shell, they don't crack nearly as often. So it helps keep the embryo inside the egg nice and safe. So we someday it can hatch, emerge, and then we have another turtle. So that might be one reason that these reptiles have a leathery shelled egg. So reptiles have dry, scaly skin, are cold-blooded, and have those leathery shelled eggs. But of course, there are things that make reptiles very different from each other too. Again, because we're never going to mistake a snake for something like a turtle. So what makes these reptiles so unique and special? Well, let's look at something like a turtle. When we see a turtle, like this critter right here, and I'm guessing I didn't have to tell any of you that you could recognize this animal immediately as a turtle just by looking at the features on its body. So what are those features that really stand out on a turtle and let us know that that animal is a turtle? So we do have the dry, scaly skin. We have an animal that's cold-blooded, and we could kind of figure that out by monitoring the body temperature. And if you're watching a female turtle, we might observe those leathery shelled eggs. But what things make it more unique? What things separate it from some of the other reptiles? Most of you are probably sitting at home and you're saying the shell. You're absolutely right. These turtles have a very hard shell, which is very, very good for protection. So these animals have shells. Do all turtles have shells? And the answer is yes, they do. And that's something that's very unique to turtles, is that when we're looking at the reptile world, if it has a shell, it is definitely a turtle. Now, not all turtles have a very hard shell. There are some turtles out there called soft shell turtles, which have a kind of more of a rubbery or cartilage-based shell, versus these shells, which are made out of bone. So these are much, much stiffer than like a soft shell might be. But they all have some type of shell. And even if it's a little bit softer than us, it's still very good for protection. So those bones are incredibly hard. So if a predator tried to get into a turtle shell, it would have a very hard time getting through that. So if we should flip the shell upside down, we can see exactly which bones these shells are made out of. So if we look at the interior of the bone, running right down the middle of this, we can see a spine. So if you reach back, running right down the middle of your back should be a spine as well. The rest of the bones are made out of ribs. If you find your ribs, it's like if your ribs were really, really wide and all kind of fused together, then you would have a shell that kind of covered up your vital organs, your heart and your lungs and all the different guts, things that you have inside of your body. And so that's one really good thing about shell, is that they're very, very good for protection. But there might be some bad things too. Like when we think about turtles, we don't think about an animal that moves very quickly, because they do have some mobility issues, because shells are first off very heavy, and it makes it so they can't be quite as flexible as things like snakes and lizards. So they have a harder time moving faster. Because they have that protection, they normally don't have to move quite as fast. So you're right. Turtles definitely have that shell, something that all turtles have that make them very unique and a very good source of protection. There are some other features that turtles have in common as well. To find these other features, we might have to look into a turtle's mouth, which is probably not the best place in the world to look. Because they have a mouth, some turtles could possibly bite. But if we were to look into a turtle's mouth, we would notice that a turtle is missing something that we have. So kind of feel around with their tongue. What do you have in your mouth that is kind of special? So we have some teeth in our mouth, right? And our teeth help us eat our food. Well, a turtle does not have any teeth. So here's a turtle skull. If I open up his mouth, we're going to notice that there are no teeth inside of that skull. So what does a turtle have instead that helps them eat? Well, rather than having teeth, they have a beak. So a beak has kind of hooked bill, kind of like a lot of birds might have. It's very, very good for tearing apart food, but they don't chew the food the same way that we do. So they don't sit there and kind of munch at it for a little bit. So it's ground into little pieces and then swallow. Instead, they kind of tear off a chunk of the food and they swallow that chunk whole. So another feature that makes turtles very special are that specialized beak. So turtles have a shell and a beak, and that's something that makes them very unique compared to other types of reptiles. Now, oftentimes I kind of wonder, what would it be like to be a turtle? To be walking around and need some type of shell for protection and to have that beak for eating different things. So rather than just wondering, let's go ahead and find out. So we're going to transform all of you into turtles. So to transform into turtles, we're going to need a shell. So you can show me your shell, and I'm just going to pretend that you're playing along at home. Can't see anybody, but I hope we're enjoying ourselves at least. So we have a shell. And then to make a beak, you're going to take your lips and you're going to curl over top of your teeth. So you kind of look like an old grandpa or grandma or something like that. Sorry, grandpa and grandmas, if you're out there, you might have your teeth still. Kind of curl them over top of your mouth. So a shell and we have a beak. What we're going to do is I'm going to bring out some puppets of some animals. If you think it's an animal, a turtle should be scared of. I want you to take your shell and I want you to close it up. If you think it's an animal, a turtle would want to eat, you're going to go ahead and take a bite of that animal. So show me what you do if you're scared. Close up our shells. Show us what we do if we're trying to take a bite. Scared? And take a bite. All right, so let's give it a shot. So I'm going to bring out a puppet. If you're scared, hide yourself. If you think it's an animal turtle like to eat, go ahead and take a bite. So what if you were a turtle? You were just walking along, minding your own business, and you saw one of these animals creeping closer to you. What would you do? Well, if you're like me, you're probably going to try and hide from this animal because this animal is a fox, which is a very, very cool type of animal. But if they found a turtle that wasn't hiding properly, they might try and eat that turtle. So if a fox would come along, we definitely try and hide from that fox. Now let's say that we're still a turtle walking around on land and we see one of these animals kind of sneaking up and crawling towards us. What are we going to do for this animal? Well, some of us might have some type of fear of insects, but turtles certainly do not. And if they had a grasshopper that was sneaking closer and closer to them, they would definitely try and eat that grasshopper. They go ahead and take a big old bite, gobble up the grasshoppers. Turtles eat a variety of different foods, some vegetation, some fruits, and some fungi and mushrooms and different things along those lines. But they also really love to eat different types of arthropods and worms and small little creepy crawly types of critters. So grasshoppers would definitely be on the menu for almost all turtles. So taking another bite. Very good job, turtles. Let's try one more. This time we're going to pretend that you are a water turtle. So you're one of those turtles that likes to swim around in our ponds and lakes and rivers that we have here in Missouri. What if you were swimming along and you noticed one of these little guys creeping along the bottom of the pond? What would we do? Well, it might depend on how big this critter is and how big we are. But if we're kind of an average-sized turtle, this average-sized crawdad, we might go up to it. We would definitely try and eat that. Lots of turtles love to eat these crawdads, especially as they're kind of molting their exoskeletons. They make a very good food source for a lot of different turtles. Now, if I was a baby turtle and this was a big crawdad, I might swim around the other way. Because if this crawdad can catch that baby turtle, then he might try and eat the turtle. So it kind of depends on how big you are and how big your prey is as well. But very good job, turtles. You guys did a fantastic job. And so being a turtle with that shell and the beak does seem very easy, but of course there are all sorts of things out there dangerous that these turtles have to worry about, a variety of different predators that they have to hide from, including things like lawnmowers and cars, which is why when we are mowing our lawns, I always like to kind of run around and check out my lawn first to see if there are any turtles or snakes or anything slithering or crawling around on there. And we need to be very careful when we're driving down the road so we can give these turtles kind of a break and try not to run them over. So, it's not super hard being a turtle, but there definitely are some dangers out there, some things that they have to worry about. So we have these fantastic turtles, which are super unique types of reptiles. But what about some of our other types of reptiles? Well, let's go on and talk about what I think is one of the coolest types of reptiles that we have in Missouri, and that is our lizards. And the reason I love lizards so much is because I grew up in northern Iowa, about 6.5 hours north of Jefferson City. In northern Iowa, there are basically no lizards. I never saw a wild lizard until I was 18 years old. So there are some up in a few pockets up in different places in Iowa, but they're definitely much, much rarer up there than they are down here. Now in my Jefferson City home, I can go out my back door on a nice sunny day and I can see some lizards out there. I can go out my front door, see a couple more. I can come out here to the nature center and see several more. So finding a lizard really isn't that hard as long as it's not wintertime. So there are lizards absolutely everywhere. That's why I think they're so very unique, because there's something that I didn't have the chance to study very much as I was growing up. So we have these lizards in Missouri. One of my favorite types of lizards are those ones with the little blue tail. You guys ever seen the little blue-tailed lizards before? Well, some of you might have. And those blue-tailed lizards are actually very young skinks. So skinks start off with a blue-colored tail, and then as they mature, their tail will actually kind of change to a brownish color. And so these are skinks that we oftentimes see just in our backyards at times. If you haven't seen lizards before, come out to the Runge Nature Center. You have a very good chance of seeing them out here. But they're one that we can see throughout most of the state. The skinks are kind of characterized by having very smooth type scales. So they almost look like they're slimy, even though they're not very slimy at all. But when they're young, they do have that blue tail. And that blue tail is actually very important for their survival. Skinks can do something very special in order to avoid predators. They can take their tail and they can break their tail off of their body as a predator is chasing after them. So their tail will break off and then it will sit there and it will wiggle, distracting the predator and allowing the lizard to run away. So this isn't something that they like to do, but it is something that they can do in order to help them survive. Over time, those lizards will start to regrow that tail, and it usually takes several months for that to happen. So they're kind of vulnerable during that time, but still very, very important. Better be alive and regrowing a tail than to be eaten by some type of predator. So very special things that lots of lizards do. Now, not all lizards can lose their tails, but skinks are one that definitely can. Because there really are a lot of predators out there who would like to eat a lizard. You know, I always think about them being so fast, and that's very true. They are very good at getting away from danger. But we have some other animals in Missouri that are even faster. A variety of snakes would like to eat lizards. Some birds like to eat lizards, including one I think the coolest birds that we have in Missouri. This guy here, which is a roadrunner. So roadrunners actually are real birds. And they do live especially in southern Missouri, like around Branson type area, kind of headed west over to Joplin. And they are incredibly, incredibly fast, just like their cartoon example. So they like to run after lizards. They use that really large beak to grab the lizards. They'll thrash them against some rocks to kill them, and then they'll swallow that lizard whole. So lizards are definitely trying to avoid predators, especially things like roadrunners. So a very, very cool type of bird. So we have turtles, which again are very cool. Things like lizards, which are super unique, and I think they're just amazing Missouri animals. But then we also have things like snakes here in Missouri. So I'm sure a lot of us, if I showed you a snake, you would know immediately that was a snake. So what makes a snake so unique versus other types of reptiles? Well, if we compare it to a turtle, one of the first things that we notice is that a snake does not have a shell. So if we notice there's no shell on that animal, we automatically know that that animal is definitely not a type of turtle. But there's more that makes them unique. Another thing that really stands out is snakes do not have legs. No snake in the world has modern legs that are used for walking around. So that's another very unique feature. Unfortunately, there is a type of lizard out there that also has no leg, called a legless lizard. In Missouri, we have something called a slender glass lizard, which is our type of legless lizard. So how would I tell a legless lizard versus a snake? Well, there still are some more features I can look at. One thing I can look at is the animal's eyes. Snakes have this crazy, like if you've ever had a staring contest with a snake, I highly recommend it. If you have a little bit of a phobia with snakes, come out here to the Runge Nature Center. We have some snakes behind glass, and then you can have a staring contest with them. But as you stare into a snake's eyes, they sit there and they stare right back. And they might go to sleep, and they might wake up, and they're still staring all the time. They never, ever blink their eyes because they don't have any eyelids like what we have. Instead, they have a clear scale going on over top of their eyes to keep their eyes from drying out, but they can never, ever blink. Our slender glass lizard that we have in Missouri, if you stared into its eyes, it would blink. Another feature that our lizards in Missouri have that snakes do not is our lizards in Missouri have a little ear holes where snakes do not have ear holes. So that's just something else that we can look at. Now, the problem with using those types of features is you have to be very, very close to the snake or the lizard to see those things. When generally, I would recommend staying away from anything that might be a snake, because there are some snakes out there that are venomous in Missouri, although they're relatively rare compared to a lot of our non-venomous species. And until we can tell the difference, we're going to treat all snakes kind of like they're a little bit more dangerous. Still respect them, but rather than going up to them and grabbing them, and certainly going up to them trying to kill them, I would just say stay away from those animals. So when you see a snake, the right thing to do is go, oh, cool, a snake, and then to walk away from that snake. Because again, there are some that are fairly dangerous. Now, to put things into perspective, though, any idea how many people in Missouri died from venomous snake bites last year? Most of us are probably guessing too high because the answer is 0. The year before that, 0. Year before that, 0. So it's very, very rare that somebody in the state of Missouri dies from a venomous snake bite. Now, people certainly get bit. They might get bit by a copperhead or bit by a rattlesnake, and that might give you some tissue damage and things like that, but it's very unlikely to kill you. So if you get bit by a venomous snake, don't just lay down and die. Go to the hospital, and they can definitely help you there. But they really, relative to a lot of other things, they are not all that dangerous. In the whole United States, on the average year, there's only 1 or 2 people that are killed by venomous snakes in the whole United States. When we look at the number of people that are killed by dog attacks, just domestic dogs, the answer is usually closer to like 30 is about the average. Same for cattle. Cows kill more people than venomous snakes do, and more people die from falling out of bed, where the average is closer to like 400 every single year than some of these snakes and things that we're oftentimes very afraid of. So just kind of respect their space, and they're really not as dangerous as we make them out to be. But just go on, let them doing their thing. And the reason that we want these snakes and these other animals out here in Missouri is because they have a very important role to fill. Now, if we look at like a snake's favorite food, which there's lots of different types of snakes out there, and some prefer things like insects, some like fish and amphibians and things like that. But the average snake's favorite food is probably something like mice. So there's lots of mice out there. And, having some mice around is not a bad thing. Mice are actually very interesting animals, but we don't want them to come like living inside of our house. We don't want them to be going out there and eating animal feed or destroying grain. And if the mouse population got out of control, that's something that could definitely happen. So what keeps a mouse's population in check? Well, predators is one of the answers. So we look at things like hawks, foxes, and those types of animals certainly eat mice, but also things like snakes eat a lot of mice. If we look at something like a rat snake, so a lot of us have big black rat snakes that might live in our neighborhood, and some of those guys are longer than I can spread out my arms. One of those big 6-foot-long rat snakes might be able to eat up to 200 mice in a single year. So they do a very, very good job at helping to balance our mouse population. Because again, having mice around actually is kind of a cool thing. But if you took 2 mice, a boy mouse and a girl mouse, and they of course made mouse babies, and those babies made babies, and those babies made babies, and those babies made babies, all of which can happen over the course of 1 year. By the end of the year, conservatively, you kind of do the math, you might get 164 extra mice out there that just started from 2. So we really do want that population, that nature to be balanced. And so snakes, turtles, and lizards all help to do that. They help to balance nature, acting as both predators, eating a variety of animals, and acting as prey. But I think having them around just because they're interesting is more than enough. So very, very interesting types of animals. So we've learned a little bit about the different types of reptiles that we have in Missouri, our snakes, turtles, and lizards. We know some of the features that they have in common, things like dry, scaly skin, those leathery shelled eggs, and being cold-blooded. And then we learned some things that make them unique. Turtles having a shell and a beak for eating and for protecting their bodies. Some lizards with the ability to lose their tail in order to avoid danger, things like roadrunners. And then we have snakes, which we know the best way to stay safe around them is just go, oh, cool, and then kind of walk the other direction, give that snake plenty of space. And how all those different types of reptiles help to balance nature. Now, before we move on and take some questions here, I would like to share a couple of live examples of these animals with you today. And so I have some of these critters here. These animals are generally here at the Nature Center, and they do help us with a lot of programs. But overall, reptiles are definitely better left outside. So, it's not illegal to keep most reptiles as a pet, but outside is where they can find all the needs that they have and kind of take care of themselves. So definitely the best place to keep reptiles. But we have a few education animals that we sometimes use for programs. So that's what these animals are. So just bear with me for 1 second while I grab some of our critters. Here's one I think we'll recognize pretty quickly. So this is a turtle. And of course, we can tell it's a turtle because we have dry, scaly skin. It is cold-blooded. I can feel that's about the same temperature as this room right now, where I definitely feel a little bit warmer than the room because, again, I'm warm-blooded, always about 98. Where this guy probably feels closer to like 74, which is about how warm we keep it in this room. So I can tell it's cold-blooded. Now, I can't see any eggs being laid or anything like that. It just so happens this turtle is a male, so it probably isn't going to lay eggs, but they do lay kind of a rubbery shelled egg. But then I know for sure that, especially if it's a turtle, not just a reptile, because he has a shell, which is very good for protection, and I can see that beak. And if you open up his mouth, we would not find any teeth in there. So this type of turtle is called a red-eared slider. So if we look at the side of his head, we have these little red stripes going down the side. So that's where the red-eared part comes from. And then a slider, so as these turtles, which is an aquatic type of turtle, so it's a turtle that spends a lot of time around the water, they'll generally sit on logs and kind of sun themselves. And then when people get too close, these turtles just kind of slide off into the water. So being a water turtle, we can also see the webbed feet on this animal. So very, very good for swimming, pushing water as we go along. So we can see the webbed feet. We can also see the shape of the shell. These turtles have a relatively flat shell compared to something like a box turtle, which has much higher domed shell and is a turtle that spends a lot of time on land. Now, some other features that make red-eared sliders pretty unique is that, like I said, I can tell that this is a male. And I do that by looking at the turtle's hands. So for a lot of turtles, especially types of pond turtles, which a red-eared slider is, the males have these very long claws. And females, which are generally a little bit bigger, have much shorter claws. And that's a very, very important adaptation because those turtles with the long claws, those males, use those long claws for going up and tickling girls. And so they'll go up to a female turtle's face and they'll kind of tickle her in the face. And that's a sign saying, hey, I kind of think you're cute. We should go off and we should make some baby turtles together. So it's a very special mating ritual that they use those long claws for. So see how huge those are? They're not very good for digging. They're not used for scratching their prey or skewering their prey, but just good for tickling girls. So a female turtle will have a much, much shorter claws than those if we're looking at a red-eared slider. So that's one of the animals that I brought with us today. And so you can find these types of turtles all over the state of Missouri, around a lot of the parks that we have here in Jefferson City and up in Columbia. But again, all over the place. You'll find them on rivers, ponds. As long as there's some source of water, you might find them there. And they can also wander considerably far from water. So you might find one wandering through your lawn, even though the nearest creek or river might not be all that close. But we can find these guys absolutely everywhere. So that's our red-eared slider. Then we have this little guy, which I will not be taking out of its container, because this guy is pretty quick compared to that turtle. So here we have a skink. This is a broad-headed skink, and so there's a couple of different skink species that look very, very similar. Five-line skink looks very, very similar to this one. This is an adult male, so we can see that it doesn't really have any stripes. It's mostly brown overall, and that has that kind of orangish colored face. And that lets me know it's a male, where female is going to have a couple of stripes going down her body. This is one of those types of lizards when they're very, very young, have that blue colored tail. But as they age, that tail changes to a brown color. If they lose their tail while it's blue, it grows back as a brown color. So they only get that blue tail for one portion of their life. And after that, it's brown tails from there on out. But they can keep on losing that tail over and over and over and over again. But again, it does take some amount of time to regrow that tail. So it's not something that they like to do. So if you're going out there and you're observing lizards, it's a better thing to just go out there and watch them, because if you try and capture them, they might lose their tail, and then they're going to have a harder time surviving for a little while. Very cool critter. You can see that ear hole right behind the guy in there. Although it doesn't look like he's going to blink for us at the moment. So we looked at a turtle, and we've looked at a skink, a lizard. Let's go ahead and look at our last type of reptile that we have here in the state of Missouri. If I can get it out of the bag, that is. So our last type of reptile that we have and that we talked about is going to be this type of guy right here. So this is a snake. And of course, we can tell it's a snake. We don't see any shell. We don't see any legs. And if we looked at it long enough, we'd notice that there's no ear hole on the side of his face. And he would never, ever blink in his entire life. So this type of snake is called a bull snake, which is one of the longest types of snakes that we have in Missouri. The record for Missouri is about 8 feet, although most bull snakes are considerably shorter than that, more like towards like 6 or 6.5 feet. But still a pretty good sized snake for the state of Missouri. If we look at the smallest snake in Missouri, we're talking about a snake that's only about that long. So we have some other snakes that look a little bit more like worms. But of course, this is one that we would never, ever mistake for any type of worm. But a very cool type of snake. And other places, they might call this snake a gopher snake because they spend a lot of time eating larger mammals and spending a lot of time in animal burrows. So we frequently find bull snakes, especially in those areas that have a little bit more prairie habitat. So down in or up in northern Missouri and down southwest Missouri. One of my favorite types of snakes. I think they're just so pretty and so very interesting. And we can tell that it's not venomous, not only because I'm holding it, but there's a few other features that we could look at. We can look at the pupils. So in bright light, like this bright light that we have right here, those pupils are still circular. A venomous species like a copperhead or a timber rattlesnake, when they get bright light, their pupils kind of constrict and they look more like cat eyes. So it's kind of like a vertical line instead. But it's only really when we're looking at the bright light. If you see them at night when there's not much light at all, their pupil will almost look circular. Venomous snake also has something called a pit. And a pit is a little hole that's between their eye and their nostril. And it helps them sense body heat. All of our venomous species in Missouri are all pit vipers. Where this guy is definitely not a pit viper, just have those pits. So he's not sensing any type of body. Now we can see the nostril and the eye, but there's no other hole that's right in there. Now, again, the problem with using those types of features is you have to be very, very close to those snakes to see those things, which we don't want to do. So if you're trying to learn venomous snakes from non-venomous snakes, it's best to look at things like the overall coloration of the snake and kind of compare snakes against each other. So if you learn all the venomous species, that's great, but knowing some of those non-venomous ones, which sometimes look very similar, is also very important. Yeah, one of my favorite snakes that we have here at the Nature Center. All right. So today we took a look at some of the different reptiles that we have in the state of Missouri, some features that they have in common, other things that make them very unique. And then, of course, got an opportunity to see some of these animals, which, of course, would be so much cooler if we were in person. You were able to touch them and observe them very carefully. But I hope we enjoyed this Zoom program. Again, I'm going to challenge you that even on rainy days like today, the best place to learn about nature is getting out there in nature. So, here in a little bit, and actually here in Jess City, it doesn't look like it's raining right at the moment. So definitely get outside, experience nature. And I hope you guys all have a fantastic rest of your summer and have a good time getting out there and looking at all these different critters. And so with that, if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that we might have.
Yeah, so far, a couple of questions have come through in the chat. One of them related to the bull snake. Can you say again how long the bull snake typically is?
So the bigger bull snakes typically grow to about 6 or 6.5 feet, which is just a little bit wider than I can reach my arms. Pretty good sized snakes. So just a little bit bigger than like the rat snakes that we have around here, which is usually about 6 feet. This bull snake is he's about 4.5 feet long, which is pretty incredible. He came to the Nature Center as a very young snake. He was not even a year old, I don't believe. And then over the last couple of years, he's grown to this size. And so this snake is at the Nature Center because it's illegal to breed these snakes in Missouri without the proper types of permits. Somebody was out there breeding them, and then our agents came through and found out what they were doing, and then they confiscated not only this guy, but lots of other animals from that person. And rather than going out there and having to destroy the animals, they tried to find nice homes for them, which is why he ended up here at the Nature Center.
Cool.
Yeah, pretty good sized snakes.
Yeah. The other question was actually about fish. The question was, how many fish do you have where you are? And I'm not sure if that is at Runge or how many fish there are in the state. So if you just want to maybe address both of those.
Good, very good question. I'm trying to remember the exact number in Missouri, and it's quite a bit. When we look at all the different types of mammals and reptiles and amphibians that we have in the state of Missouri, that number is pretty good, especially for a state in the Midwest. But that pales in comparison to the number of fish and the number of birds, of which there are far, far more. And of course, we're not even including things like insects. So I don't even have a guess off the top of my head. It's well over 100 species of fish that we have in Missouri. At the Nature Center, around 12 species, I'm going to say, without going through and trying to list out each one. So quite a few in our big fish tank that we have here at the Nature Center. And then we do have some wild fish on our property too, in some of our ponds and down our creek, which I think are even cooler than the ones that we have in our tank. Although we do have an American eel, which is one of the coolest fish in all of Missouri. So lots of cool fish.
Very cool. I had a question about the different species of snake in the state. Is there a part of the state where it's more likely, where you're more likely to find the venomous species that live in Missouri, or are they kind of widespread throughout the state?
So they are fairly widespread. When you get into far north Missouri, they're quite a bit rarer up there. But when you get, so it just kind of depends on what part of state that you're in. Here in central Missouri, our two most common types are copperheads and the timber rattlesnake. Copperheads being the more common one, and like those timber rattlesnakes are kind of in pockets located in different spots around central Missouri. If you get down to southeast Missouri, you still have copperheads and you still have timber rattlesnakes, but then you also start getting into the cottonmouth kind of territory. So they're mostly down in southeast Missouri. If you get down to southern Missouri and some of our gladiator type habitats, then you start entering the habitat of a pygmy rattlesnake, which is our smallest venomous species, only about this big. They're pretty teeny tiny little things. And then there are a couple others. We do have two different species of Massasauga rattlesnakes, both of which are very, very rare, and they're generally a wetland rattlesnake. But if you see one of those, you definitely call us right away, because we want to know about anywhere that we find those types of critters. But those other ones are definitely a little bit more common.
Okay. And we had another question come through on the chat just now. Do all turtles have webbed feet?
No, not all turtles have webbed feet. So our box turtles that we have in Missouri don't have a webbed foot. They're generally a type of turtle that spends most of their time on land. They can swim, although they're not very good at it. So those turtles we find around the water definitely have those webbed feet, are more adapted for that environment, where our box turtles do not. Now, there are things like tortoises and those types of animals out there in the world, of course. We don't have those here in Missouri. And really the big difference between a tortoise and a box turtle is that they actually do have a different type of foot configuration, or a tortoise is made for even having a heavier shell. So their foot's kind of built more like an elephant, where it's really built like a pedestal for holding all the extra weight. Where our box turtles are actually very closely related to our pond turtles. Just that we have this one animal that decided to go aquatic, or mostly aquatic, and this other animal decided we'll go mostly on land, but they're still kind of like cousins. Where the tortoises are just a little bit more distantly related. Very good question.
Well, does anyone else have a question they want to ask, either via chat or use the raise hand tool, and I can enable your microphone and you can ask Austin directly. Not seeing anything else, and no hands are going up. Oh, we did just have someone. Yeah. So we will have a question coming through on audio.
Okay.
Go ahead. You can unmute your microphone.
How many turtles do you have at Runge?
I should have counted them all before I came out here. Oh, let me try and count real quick. I want to say 8. And so we have a couple different types of snapping turtles here at the Nature Center. We have an alligator snapping turtle, which is a very rare species down in southeast Missouri. And then we have the common snapping turtle, which is just that. It's all over the state. We have a soft shell turtle inside of our big fish tank. So they spend a lot of time swimming in bigger waters. So it seems like it's very happy in there. We have several different types of box turtles. And then we have, you know what? We actually have 10. I just remembered a couple more. We have a mud turtle, and then several species of pond turtles. So we have a pretty good diversity. Again, not really keeping them as pets, but good teaching tools for different people, so they kind of know what they're seeing when they go to different places around the state.
Cool. Right. Does anyone else have a question for Austin before we wrap up? All right, doesn't look like it. So I want to thank you, Austin, on behalf of the library for sharing your time and all this information with us. It was a lot of fun. I certainly learned a lot about reptiles in Missouri, and I have lived in mid-Missouri for almost my entire life and didn't know that there were roadrunners in the state. So I definitely learned something there.
We're at the very northern tip of the range, and there was a couple here in Jeff City. Oh, I guess it's been over a decade ago now. But yeah, if you want to see those, definitely head southwest, that type of area.
Cool. Well, I also want to thank everyone for attending today. We appreciate you spending part of your afternoon with us. If you want to check out recordings of our past events, check out our website, www.dbrl.org/events, and look under the Recently Live section. This afternoon's program has been recorded, and it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel and will be available on our website as well in just a few days. So if you want to watch it again or share with others who couldn't be here this afternoon, you'll be able to do that. So thank you again, Austin, and all of you for joining us and sharing part of your afternoon. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your summer. Have try and stay dry this weekend and enjoy getting out and seeing nature as Austin encouraged us to do. So thank you all, and take care. We hope to see you again.
Thank you, guys.